It's Daniel, class number 4. So as we established last time, we finished chapter 5, you should remember. And now we're about to look at chapter 6. Now I'm going to do chapter 6 relatively quickly, so you need to read it on your own. The simple version of chapter 6 is, in the first year of Darius the Mede, something happened. The people around Daniel tried to get him killed. And they tried to get him killed by putting him in a position where he had to choose between his relationship with God and the decree of the king. And because the decree of the king was that he could not worship anybody or pray to anybody except for the king, including the God of all the heavens and creator of all the earth, he just said, I'm going to go pray like I always do. They caught him, brought witnesses that he was doing it, and he got condemned to be thrown into a den of lions. He was thrown in. The king didn't want to do it, but because he'd been stupid enough to sign the decree, it had to happen, and Daniel was delivered from the lions, and praise God, he was established. Now, when did that happen? We've looked at, last time I was trying to show you a chart. I apologize that it didn't come through as well, but it's on the website, so you can download it and look at it. It's a very detailed chronology of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who is the head of gold, in the 2nd chapter of Daniel. And then that detailed chronology, one of the things it ends up with is when Belshazzar, being the regent in Babylon, his kingdom goes away. The first person who takes that kingdom is Cyrus the Mede, or Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede seems to have been a general operating under Cyrus the Persian, who became known as Cyrus the Great. Even in the secular world, there are many books written about him. He was lauded for many decades to hundreds of years after his reign. He was looked upon by people from other places, the Greek writers that come after him, as one of the greatest men of all time. Cyrus is quite an impressive guy. And Darius the Mede is the general who was a Median person who operated under Cyrus but took Babylon. He became the king of Babylon for 1 year. Why was it for 1 year? Well, he was 62 years old when he took over Babylon, and he died that year. And so when the book of Daniel says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, and then later on it'll say, we'll see later, we're not tonight, in the first year of Cyrus the Persian, those were different first years, because Darius the Mede is not Darius the first or Darius the second or Darius the third of the Persian dynasty. He is a Darius who is a Median general who operates sort of as a king underneath Cyrus. He's king of Babylon until Cyrus comes and takes over for him, basically because he died or because it was planned anyway. I'm not sure which. Nobody knows. But just one more of those. How accurate is the book of Daniel? Extremely. We talked about that in the first class. It's extremely accurate. But the lion's den is a great story because similar to his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in the 3rd chapter of Daniel, similar to them, he got tested where, bow down to this idol or bow down to the king and don't bow down to God. And he said, I'm going to bow down to God whether you throw me in a den of lions or not. And then he was delivered. There's a lot more detail about that in some other writings, like we talked about some of the Apocrypha writings that you can find in certain translations of the Bible. A lot more detail on the lion's den and how it went. I think First Esdras has some things about it, and talk about how the lions weren't fed for a long time, just on purpose to make them so hungry that there was no way he could be delivered. It wasn't like they just, said, yeah, it's a good looking menu, but I'm really not hungry. No, these were hungry lions. That's sort of detailed in that book. And then also that when they threw in the people that had conspired against Daniel, they fed the lions first, threw them in, then the lions still killed them. So it just helps you to understand. It was more detail on the story. But I just can't spend a lot of time on it and get through everything in the next few classes. And it's such a simple chapter that you can read it a few times and understand what's going on and how Daniel was completely saved from the lion's den and had put his trust in God, just like he had all along. Just to summarize that, because this is the last chapter that's going to deal with that issue, to summarize it, remember this, that Daniel was prophesied that, in the days of King Hezekiah, it was prophesied that there would come a time when the people would be taken captive from Israel and Judah, and they would be taken off into a faraway land, and it specifies it even, and then that they would be eunuchs and people of some power and position in that kingdom, and that shortly thereafter, in a couple of kings worth, we get to where Daniel is taken captive early on in the last 4 kings' reign, and he is taken off to Babylon, and then we studied how he became really a Joseph figure in a sense. He went ahead to help prepare the way for them in their captivity, just like Joseph was sent ahead when Jacob's family ended up going down into Egypt. And in both cases, we find these stories, and the lion's den story shows this at the end of Daniel's life as well as at the beginning of their life, how submitted to God they were, how much these were people of God. I love the quote that we talked about in Azariah's prayer in the fiery furnace, when he says, we have no sacrifice for sin. We can't go to the temple and take the goat and lay our hands and confess our sin. We have no way, but with a humble and a broken heart we come before you. I mean, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful New Testament-y prayer, as I like to call it. So that's who Daniel is. And so this is the completion of this story about Daniel, of how much a man of God he was and how much he stood for the God of heaven, even though he was in captivity. He was not where his home was supposed to be. He'd been stolen as a young man from his own place, brought here, forced to become a eunuch in some fashion, whatever that means physically or not. And then he had to live in Babylon his entire life. And we looked at that timeline of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, because when Daniel got there, Nebuchadnezzar was crowned prince, and then he became king. And Daniel lasts all the way up until Belshazzar, a very old man. But he was perfect all the way through all of that. And it's a testimony of what we're supposed to be. Because why? He put his trust in God. He didn't go out and say, I'm going to make myself perfect. I'm going to show God what a good guy I am. He just submitted himself to Father's ways. He said, I'm going to do it Father's way. And he did it. And he lived that way. He wasn't grumbling. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't upset. He wasn't frustrated. He wasn't disappointed. He knew who his God was, and he knew his God could do anything. Which is why when the Nebuchadnezzar says something that they keep testifying, that nobody asked you to tell them the dream and the interpretation, that's crazy. Daniel goes to God and he gets the dream and the interpretation. And he knew that he would, because he knew God was faithful. And he went to him and he prayed and sought God. So anyway, Daniel, what an outstanding, absolutely amazing, incredible example to all of us of how to walk in this world, because he was walking in the world about as bad as it gets, and yet he walked perfect before God. So we complete that. Just so we can finish, anybody have any questions about Daniel or any of those things that we said that you didn't understand? Everybody's good that's here? Okay. So Daniel chapter 7. So where are we now? In the first year of Belshazzar. So we've actually now gone back in time. It's another thing about this chapter 6 is it sort of skipping ahead, because the first year of Belshazzar is a few years before the first year of Darius the Mede. So it finishes the story of Daniel. Now we're going to look at these visions that Daniel had. This first vision that we talked about in detail in chapter 2, this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. Nebuchadnezzar saw this vision of this great statue and the great kingdoms, and Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. You win the prize, you're number one, you're the top of the heap. But in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. So this is Daniel's dream. And visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, so who's he telling? He's telling the people that are around him. See, he didn't hide this stuff. It got written down. He's telling people around him, all the people of God that were around him. I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. So just to help you understand, when we talk about the great sea, we're talking about all the peoples of the earth. This is what, you'll see this as a common interpretation of this, just to help you understand what's going on. And there's four winds of heaven striving on the great sea. This is not as fancy now as the head of gold and the arms of silver. This is not this really glorious looking thing. This is this stormy thing going on. And four great beasts. These are not, again, heads of gold. These are beasts. They come up from the sea, diverse one from the other. The first in this picture, and now's a good time maybe to flip it over so that people online can just see the picture better, just as we read this. The first is like a lion, and so you can follow down with me, that had eagle's wings. I mean, that's kind of a weird looking beast. And I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, does that remind you of anything? Daniel talked about the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had about when he's going to go into his mania, we called it, where he sort of ate grass and moved around and stuff. And what happened to him? He got stood back up, put on his feet, and given a new heart. He recognized God is God. Isn't that amazing? Well, what he's saying right here is that he was lifted up from the earth, made stand upon feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. It just harkens back to that. The lion with the eagle's wings. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side and had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. And after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. This one. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. It had dominion. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. That bottom one there, which is, it's hard to describe, because he says, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible. I mean, I don't know what that looks like. And strong exceedingly. That's why this artist, whoever they were, you see all these rippling muscles. Strong exceedingly. It's to remind you. Okay? And it had great iron teeth. And if you look at the teeth in the picture, there's this teeth of iron. And it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. That's pretty wild. So we can switch back to live picture. So you see those beasts. They're described. We haven't interpreted them yet. I've given you a couple of clues to a couple things. But, you know, the scripture is so wonderful because it's going to tell us all the interpretation as we go. It had 10 horns. So then he considers the horns. He's looking at the horns and the beast that he sees. And behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn there were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. It's like, whoa, that's a wild looking horn. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, They had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. And I saw in the night visions. He's still just the vision here. And behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. This is pretty amazing stuff. You know, this is really the beginning of where you hear this term, Son of Man, the one that Jesus took for himself. You hear this is the beginning of it. And they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. Hence, remember the scripture from the previous class that we know from the law that the Messiah is going to have a kingdom forever? Which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. So this is, just try to be Daniel for a moment, and you see this stuff, and you don't know what it means. And it's troubling. So we see these cute little pictures, and we think, oh, isn't that cute? He's seeing striving winds upon the sea, and these great beasts rising up out of the sea and stamping and devouring and taking dominion. And this last beast is just, that little horn comes up, and he's just fixing it. What is that? It's crazy. And verse 16 says, I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. So we don't have to wonder. So let's see what it has to say as we look at these pictures. Let's see what he says about the interpretation. These great beasts, which are four kings, and I'm going to say, or kingdoms. And the only reason I'm able to say that is later on you're going to see where it refers to them as kingdoms. Okay? The words are different. And remember that Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, but we often talk about the head of gold relating to Babylon as, the empire that existed. There may be a single outstanding king in some of these empires, so in these kingdoms, that really is the outstanding person that speaks of that kingdom. Or maybe a couple of different kings, but it says here that there are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. Now, we just saw them arise out of the sea, remember? But they're going to arise out of the earth. So what are we talking about? So I told you that when we look at seas and multitudes of seas, we're talking about the people. You're just thinking about all the people. There's a sea of people, in a sense, all the peoples of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So there's the interpretation. These four beasts are four kings. They're going to rise up. That's all he tells us. But the saints of the Most High, he's focused on the latter part because that's the most glorious part to him. Saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Well, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast. In other words, he isn't really so confused about this, you wouldn't think. So where is he living at this time? He's living in the latter part of this. None of this has happened when he's living, because he's in Belshazzar's reign. We haven't even gotten to Darius the Mede yet. Okay, it's important to understand. So in that time, he says, I want to know about this fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful. He'd seen lions and bears and leopards. He'd never seen anything like this. It's exceeding dreadful. And whose teeth were of iron and nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other horn, which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. Remember, it says it's a little horn, but the look of it, it's like stronger in some way. It's got eyes and it's got a mouth speaking great things. The words, he focuses on the words. It's like the words of this thing are amazing. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. It's like, whoa, that's wild. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. That's the part that's important to him. That's what he's really focused on. The rest of this is almost like, here, you know, who cares? It's all going to happen. But the end part, oh, that's wild. That's amazing. Thus he said, verse 23, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. Remember I told you they use kingdom separately? Upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, because he noticed he was stouter, he was different. And he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. So we interpret that basically as 3.5 years. A time, 1, and times, 2 more for 3, and a dividing of times, 3.5. Okay? That's what we understand it to be. Why do we understand that? Well, it helps to reverse engineer everything, because if you go to Revelation, which we're not going to do in this class, if you go to Revelation, you'll talk about there's 3.5 years of the 70th week, and there's another 3.5 years, and it all kind of fits together. But that's how we understand that. Verse 26, the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me. My countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. What's going on? He's still wondering. He wants to know more. He wants to understand more about this. He wants to get it. And he's seen this. So I just want to kind of go over this with you. I'm going to cut to the chase a little bit and help you understand. We showed in the interpretation of these, you are the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar, after you shall arise a kingdom. And if you read it in the book of Esdras, it even focuses on the fact that there's 2 arms, because there's 2 kings, the Median and the Persian. That's why we call it the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medes and the Persians got together. And so there were 2, but it wasn't quite as strong as this kingdom in its things. After that was to come this one of brass, and then the one of iron. So if you line these up and you look at this, here's this mighty lion with his wings moving very quickly. They conquered the whole world in a very short time. After them comes a bear who rises up on one side. We've always understood that to talk about the fact that the Persians were much stronger than the Medes. They were the stronger of the 2 groups. And so the bear is kind of a little lopsided in his tunis, and he's chewing on 3. What is going on there? Well, 3 ribs is likened to the 3 horns that the little horn is going to take out of the 10. Well, when we look at that and it comes further, it's out of the Medo-Persian Empire territory that they're going to take 3 ribs. So these beasts, they fit everything. It's not just the one part. You look at this one, the leopard with the fowl's wings. What is one of the fastest moving animals? Leopards, cheetahs, those they move fast, okay? And it's got wings. So it's a fast moving thing, okay? Who was that? Alexander the Great, the Grecian Empire, the one that we've always already identified with this one. The 4 heads, we'll speak of Daniel chapter 8, which we're going to try to read if we have time and look at, and it speaks of 4 different kings that rise up out of that one. So it's telling you about what's coming. The details are there. They just it doesn't give you all of that, because this is almost, in a sense, inconsequential to what Daniel's focused on, which is this one. That 10 horns, the little horn that comes up, it's an 11th horn that's got eyes and a mouth and speaks great swelling words and takes over 3 of them and then does all of these things. And it's pretty crazy. Now, it's interesting because when the stone, which you can't see in this picture, the mountain cut out without hands comes down and hits here and becomes a great and high mountain in Daniel chapter 2, it grinds up all of this. So there's something about all of this that has a unity to it. And that unity we learn about when we look at the 70 weeks that Daniel talks about. But the whole point of it is that the devil's work on earth, the accuser of the brethren, those things that are against God have a unity to them. And they fight against him in everything that they do. And so these beasts are all of a like in that sense. And so when the Ancient of Days comes and takes over, he destroys what's left of all of them. And some of all of them is going to be represented in this. Okay? And that's when we get to, remember we talked about the fact the way we number these is the lion is kingdom number 3, the head of gold is kingdom number 3, 1 is Egypt, 2 is Assyria. They're all past by the time we get to Daniel. This is 3, 4, 5, 6. And what hasn't happened is 7 and 8. And that's a Revelation thing. It's not a Daniel thing. 7 and 8 is all Revelation. But Daniel sets it all up, and they're all of a like kind. So let's, how much time do I have, guys? Oh, good. Let's look at chapter 8, because I'd hope to get through some of this. So in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, so a couple years later, so Daniel said he's kept the matter in his heart. He's really focused on, and we talk about the last beast, but he's more focused on, this is when God's kingdom comes to earth. This is when this happens. That to him is what he's all about. And unto me, Daniel, after which appeared unto me at the first, I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, was by the river Ulai. And I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. This is a totally different picture here. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last. Now, let me tell you how this works. He's going to interpret for us, but I just got to tell you right off. That is perfect for what happened with that particular kingdom. And we'll get to what it is, because I'm going to let the Bible do the talking. I saw the ram pushing westward, so it's moving to the west. That's coming out of the east, moving towards the west, okay? And northward, and it did that, and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, he's looking at that going, wow, that's pretty amazing. Behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. In other words, there's a swiftness to it. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. One big horn sticking out between his eyes. Okay? Big notable one. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram. He was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So the great notable horn gets broken, and 4 more notable ones come up, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. So again, where does it move? From where it is, it moves south and east and toward the pleasant land, which in this case, by the way, would be west. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. It cast down some of the host and of the stars of the ground and stamped upon them. That's pretty intense. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. You go, what is that talking about? So he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. In other words, he's coming against the people of God, and the daily sacrifice gets removed. and the place of his sacrifice, his sanctuary is taken down. So he gets so powerful, he's taken out the people of God. Okay, that's the important thing. And I heard one saint speaking, verse 13. And another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation? This is the first time we get the concept of the abomination of desolation here, which Jesus even talks about in his teachings. To give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. Wow, that's just amazing. This guy is so powerful, he's going to be stamping down the people of God. Remember it said early in the one previously, it talked about the fact that he'll be given power over the saints and rule over them. Same thing. And he said unto me, he said, well, how long? He said unto me, 2,300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So how long does he get to rule? 2,300 days. So how long is 2,300 days? Yeah, it's longer than 3.5 years. What's that? 7? Yeah, it's not exactly 7. I don't know what it is, but he's going to have a period of time that's longer than that. That's why it gives you days here, because it's actually longer than 7 years. And I wasn't expecting quite to get this far, but if you get your calculator out and you sit there and you take like 360 days a year or 365, depending on which calendar year, and you divide that into that, you can figure out how many years that is. 6.3. Yeah, so if you do 360, it's a little more, but not quite 7. So it's just a different thing. But we're going to look at that in the future. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision, sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And heard a man's voice, and he gives some detail about that. And he says, behold, I will make known to you, verse 19, what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. So remember what Daniel's focused on, the end. Remember what Nebuchadnezzar asked about? He wanted to see what was going to happen in the end. And that was what he was asking about, why he had the vision. The ram, which you saw having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. So now I want to think about that for a moment. Remember we talked about the bear lifting up on one side, and then it talked about the 2 horns, one that was greater than the other. This is a well-known, look at your history, when it says the kings of the Medes and the Persians dominate the Medes. It's just the way it is. That's how it works, okay? But he's telling you who the ram is. It's the Medes and the Persians, which is also the bear and the silver arms. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Who's the first king that does this? Who's the king that does this? Alexander the Great. When you read that description that we read back here, where it talks about him coming across and hitting the ram and destroying him, if you study the campaigns of Alexander the Great and what he did when he took over Persia, I mean, you feel like you're reading right out of a history book when you read that. And this is written when we're still in the head of gold. Okay? It's the 3rd year of Belshazzar. It is so precisely accurate of what happened. And that stuff you can read, you can go get books on the campaigns of Alexander, and you see what he did. And there's always a river involved. He fought battles with the Persians, there's always a river. And so it says that he found him by a river even. And then they went, and he just comes across. And in every battle, the Persians have more men, and they should win. And Alexander just comes with such incredible intensity that he just delivers them, just knocks them out. So it's pretty wild. Now, he says, verse 22, that horn, that first horn being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, later on, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Who's he talking about? He's talking about a little horn that comes out of one of the 4 horns that comes out of the goat after the big horn gets broken. Okay? He's talking about that little horn. And dark sentences. So they're back to that words thing, right? And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. So then hearken back here to where it said that in verse 12 when we were reading it. It's all kind of hard. He practiced and prospered. So he's saying this is what, that's for this time when the little horn comes out who's just great and mighty, and he's going to do all of these things. He's going to show forth, if you read it in Revelation, mighty signs and wonders and all kinds of things about it, right? And through his policy also shall he cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. One of the things that he's going to be known for is making peace treaties and breaking them. Okay? Because he does that with Israel specifically, and he does it, I believe, with a whole lot of other nations. So he basically speaks of peace, talks about peace, but his peace is not a peace you want. And he shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Now who's that? That's the Son of Man, the Ancient of Days. His name we call Jesus. But he shall be broken without a hand. What's Jesus kill him with? Sword of his mouth. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Therefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, was sick certain days afterward. I rose up, did the king's business, and was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. In other words, he went and he shared his vision. He's a good prophet. He never kept it to himself. He went and shared it with other people of God. And it's mentioned multiple times that he was talking to other people about this, going, this is what I saw. You know, anybody understand what's going on here? I didn't show you a picture of the goat and the ram, but I think you can picture it just from the way it's written. I didn't have a really good picture of it. I have a few, but none of them do it justice. Let me talk about that real briefly so you understand. The kingdom of the Medo-Persians, and we're going to study it in more detail when we talk about the 70 weeks later on in Daniel. We're going to look at this kingdom. I'm going to show you some more timelines and some various things that happened. This kingdom was extremely powerful, but when the he-goat arrives, he just crushed it, and the Grecian kingdom takes off. So out of these two beasts, the beast with 4 horns, or in this case 4 heads, and this great and terrible one with 10 horns, there is a description of a little horn. In the case of this beast, that little horn rises outside of those 10 and conquers 3 of them. In the case of the goat, whose 1 horn breaks off, there's 4 horns rise up. Now, that happened already. Back in 300 BC, there were multiple people who were captains. They were close companions of Alexander the Great. When he died, the succession was not clear. He was not expected to die. He was still he was like 32 years old. And he died. And right before that, his number 2 guy had died. So the number 2 guy's gone. He gave that number 2 place to a different guy. And there began what are called the wars of succession. And out of those wars of succession came basically 4 divisions of the empire of Alexander. They're not equal, and we're going to learn that in Daniel. There's one that we call the Seleucid kingdom or Seleucid kingdom, depending on how you say it. That's the one that basically is what today would be Iran, Iraq, those kind of things. And it at times spread clear over into Turkey and down to Palestine and on its way towards Egypt. There was a kingdom in Egypt, which is the Ptolemaic kingdom, was one of his primary cavalry commanders, a guy named Ptolemy, who'd grown up with Alexander, been trained with him, and was very powerful. And he started a dynasty down in Egypt. And the last of his line was the famous Cleopatra. She was the last Ptolemaic ruler. And she gives over to Rome, which is the iron one, okay? And then there was one in Asia Minor, we call it today Turkey, the country of Turkey. There was a smaller group there that waxed and waned over time. And then the other one was in Macedon and Greece, which is where Alexander began, was in Macedon. His father was Philip of Macedon. So when we talk about those 4 horns that take his place in these wars of succession, one of the things that's confusing is that it's a different story depending on the year. Because this guy is powerful in that one, and then sometimes there were 5 or 6, sometimes there were 2, various guys that were fighting, and the various ones were helping each other. We're going to unite together so I can keep my peace and you can get that peace. But fundamentally, there were 4. But in the latter times, those four will be more defined. They will come up and be absolutely clear. And here's the key to it. When you look at the bathtub of the Mediterranean Sea, you look at that bathtub, that is the Roman Empire, surrounds the bathtub, okay? The pool surrounds it. It's the Roman Empire. And what we believe is going to happen, the scripture tells us, is in the latter times, out of that great and terrible beast that is these iron legs that just stamps everything and Romanizes everything, okay? There's going to come 10 kingdoms. Those 10 kingdoms are, the reason the 10 toes are not as powerful, one of the reasons is because they're separate kingdoms. It's not one Roman Empire, but it's separated, okay? And I'm not going to go into details because I only have a couple of minutes. But those, what? 5 minutes. Out of those toes are 10 kingdoms, same as the 10 horns. 3 of them are both in the Roman Empire and in the Grecian Empire. And one part of the Grecian Empire, which was also in the Medo-Persian Empire, is outside of that. And that, if you look up Parthia, if you look up Iran and Iraq, you're going to find that there's a portion that the Roman Empire never conquered, that was part of the Medo-Persian Empire and was part of the Grecian Empire. So what we believe, and I think is very clear, is that when you talk about a king of dark sayings, this king that we, in the Revelation, will be called the Antichrist, he will get that specific name, he rises out of a kingdom that's one of the 4 divisions of the old Grecian Empire and is outside the Roman Empire, and that only finds in one place, and it's in that place that we, at that time, was called Parthia. And it extends all the way from Iraq all the way over to India, that whole area. But we think of it, I always think of it, as the Zagros Mountains as the dividing line. And if you look in your geography, you can find it. You can look back at this and look there. Maybe we'll get a chance to go into it in more detail as we move forward. But that's how these things jive together. So you get these 4 heads out of the leopard, the 4 horns out of the he-goat, 4 divisions of the Grecian Empire. That revised Roman Empire is the 7th kingdom, and the revived Grecian one, in a sense, is the 8th. Or the other way, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The revised Grecian one is the 7th, and then the other one is the 8th, because he takes it over all of it. So that entire thing becomes the kingdom of the Antichrist. And it's what we would call the whole world in Bible terms. So, out of that, we understand in these visions of Daniel that he's looking at the last days. And he says that very clearly, that his interest is in the last days. People are always trying to say, well, this all happened already. It didn't all happen already. Okay? It just didn't. And this is all before Jesus comes. I'm going to read more about that as we continue in Daniel. It's all before he comes. So you understand your timeline. These beasts arise. What do? They take the world and they make it one in a way it had never been. Remember that back in the days of Babel, it all got divided? After we're done with all this, the world becomes one in a completely different way, and it's against God. And that's what happens. So that's what we're talking about in the last days. We'll spend more time on this and go into this as your preliminary, but I hope you see 2 things about this. One, that the Bible interprets itself very well. And while I'm filling in some of the blanks for you and talking about how this all fits, you notice that in that one last thing in Daniel 8, he says, the ram is the Medes and the Persians. You don't have to wonder. The goat is the king of Grecia, and the notable horn is the first king. And you see that happens. And so you look at history and you go, there it is. That's it. And the detail of it is so incredible that everything in it is fulfilled. And you can argue, oh, it's kind of vague and it doesn't say much. Anybody could have fulfilled it. No, find somebody else that fulfilled all of those things. They don't exist. Doesn't happen. In Alexander's kingdom, we could talk for days just about the kingdom of Alexander, what they did. They spread Hellenism, the Greek philosophy, way of life across all the known world and Hellenized the whole world. And then the Roman Empire just solidified all of that because it took it up as well. If you look at the gods that they worshiped, all the way from that first kingdom we talked about, Egypt, to the Assyrians, to the Babylonians, even to the Medes and Persians, although they're a little bit weird, to the Greeks and to the Romans, they're all the same. Different names, same gods, all the way through, all of them. You know, you can sit there and line them all up. You know, Zeus and Ammon from Egypt, same guy. Okay? Same stories, same everything. The mythologies line up. There is some continuousness about all of this stuff. And what it is it's all going to lead to that day when the whole world will look up at God and say, we will not have you to rule over us. And then it will all be ended. There will be no more hope for men to repent, and it'll all be ended. And that's what Daniel's interested in. So there's a lot of detail to come, lots of detail. So I want you to spend a little bit of time reading through those chapters again, looking at these things. If you're not sure, hopefully we'll get some maps up. I've been trying to pick which maps to use. It's very confusing. I threw up one of the Babylonian Empire. We threw up one of the Roman Empire just to kind of get it. But it really, if you just take a globe or a big world map and you just look at it, you can begin to see where this is all taking place and start finding some of the big places. Oh, that's Greece. Okay, I got it. Oh, that's where Iran is. Okay, so that's sort of the Persian Empire. All right, so here's where Babylon is. And get it solidified in your mind. And as I like to say, just so I'm going to say it again because I'm going to have this drilled in you. Big pool, little spa on the end. And then there's the Caspian Sea, which is a little kiddie pool over there. You see that. That's the world that we're fighting over. And then you find Jerusalem, you kind of know where Israel is, and that gives you some place to look. I just want to say this one as well. When it talks about the directions they go, that helps you as well. When you're in Persia, they move to the north and the south and towards the pleasant land and toward the east. And then this one comes out of the west and moves to the east. It helps you to understand it. Okay. So are we at the end? Done. Love you all. So does anybody have any questions since we're here? I mean, that's a lot of stuff. I wanted to get through